Anne never imagined she would fall in love with her best friend's father. An unexpected love that reignited in her everything she believed she had lost. But when the truth came out, Sophie reacted with pain and fury, letting a phrase echo that broke more than just the friendship between them. "You will never take my mother's place." Now, between a love that makes her reborn and a friendship that threatens to collapse, Anne discovers that some feelings walk between guilt, desire, and forgiveness, and that nothing is simple when the heart chooses someone the world calls forbidden. Hello, my friends. I am Linda, and this is Linda Love Stories. I hope you enjoy this story. The last ray of sun was fading on the horizon as Anne closed her laptop. The magazine office was almost empty, except for a few dedicated interns, and Sophie, her new mentee, who was finishing an article on sustainable trends in fashion. Anne watched the 25-year-old for a moment. There was something in Sophie's determination that brought her nostalgia. That same passion she had felt in her 20s when she believed she could revolutionize the fashion world with her ideas. "I'm done!" Sophie exclaimed, stretching in her chair. "How about we celebrate with a coffee?" Anne smiled, adjusting the reading glasses that hung on the tip of her nose. At 37, she didn't expect to form such a genuine friendship with someone much younger. Nonetheless, there they were, sharing ideas, dreams, and now, after-work coffees. "Perfect. I know a great place on the next block," Anne replied, storing her belongings in the worn leather bag she had received from her ex-fiancé years ago, one of the few memories she decided to keep. In the cafe, among steaming cups and the soft melody of jazz in the background, Anne found herself telling Sophie about the end of her 10-year engagement. "He simply didn't want to move forward," she explained, stirring the spoon in the cup. 10 years waiting for a wedding that would never come, for a family he never wanted to build. And when I realized that my dream of being a mother was slipping through my fingers. "You made the right choice," Sophie asserted with surprising conviction for someone so young. "You can't build a future with someone who only wants to stay in the present." Anne raised her eyebrows, impressed. "That is a very mature observation for someone your age." Sophie shrugged, a melancholy smile playing on her lips. "I lost my mother at 14. That forces you to grow up quickly." A respectful silence hung between them for a few seconds until Sophie continued. "My father suffered a lot. Suddenly he was a widower trying to raise a rebellious teenager alone. We both had to grow up together, in a way." That revelation created a new bond between them. Anne, who had felt lonely since the breakup, her friends were mostly couples or mutual friends with her ex-fiancé, found in Sophie not just a colleague, but a true friend. In the following weeks, a routine was established. Lunches together, messages exchanged during the day, and occasionally outings after work. Sophie introduced Anne to a world of trendy restaurants, bars with colourful cocktails, and parties filled with energetic young people. "You need to meet new places and new people," Sophie insisted. "How will you find someone if you keep going to the same old cafes?" Anne tried to keep up with her friend's pace, but often returned home exhausted, with sore feet and an amused smile on her face. "I think I'm too old for so much excitement," she murmured to herself as she took off her high heels and swapped her party clothes for her comfortable flannel robe. In those moments of solitude, Anne returned to her roots. A glass of red wine, a good book, and Billie Holiday's vinyl spinning on the record player she inherited from her grandfather. It was her self-care ritual, her safe haven when the world outside seemed too fast. Despite the differences in age and lifestyle, Anne and Sophie shared an almost inexplicable connection. At work, just a glance was enough for them to understand what the other was thinking. They had the same sense of humour, laughed at the same absurd situations, and even developed codes and inside jokes that no one else understood. "We share the same neuron," Sophie would say, making Anne smile with the typically youthful expression. When Sophie's 26th birthday approached, the young woman planned a grand celebration at a music venue. Anne received the invitation with enthusiasm, mixed with a twinge of apprehension. It would be another night of loud music, strange drinks, and a crowd of 20-somethings with endless energy. "Don't worry, Anne," Sophie reassured her during lunch, a week before the party. "My father will also be there. You'll have the company of someone older." Anne laughed, although internally she thought, "Great, I'll be babysitting Sophie's elderly father, probably holding his cane while he complains about the music volume." The night of the party arrived faster than Anne expected. She took extra time getting ready, opting for a black dress that balanced elegance and youthfulness, not too formal, nor trying to look younger than she was. Her brown hair, usually tied up in a professional bun, fell in loose waves over her shoulders. In the private booth reserved by Sophie, Anne was greeted with enthusiastic hugs and colourful drinks. The music vibrated through her body, so loud that it made any conversation a challenge. She danced for a while, trying to ignore the discomfort of the heels she had chosen, pretty but completely inadequate for a night of dancing. After an hour, Anne realised she needed a break. The blue cocktail she had drunk was beginning to cause a headache, intensified by the deafening music. "I'm just going to get some air," she shouted to Sophie, who nodded while continuing to dance with her friends. Anne found an outdoor patio partially covered and decorated with tropical plants. The contrast between the relative silence of that space and the chaos of the dance floor was comforting. She sat on a wooden bench, removed her shoes, and massaged her sore toes. Sometimes we need a break from the hustle and bustle, don't we? The male voice, smooth and melodious, came from the other side of the courtyard. Anne looked in the direction of the sound and saw a man sitting on a bench similar to hers. Even in the ambient lighting, she could tell that he was attractive, grey hair at the temples contrasting with the rest that was still dark, an angular face with expression lines that suggested a life full of smiles. He wore jeans and a simple dress shirt, but there was a natural elegance in his posture. "Indeed," Anne replied, feeling an inexplicable nervousness. "I think I'm too old for these parties, but I couldn't miss my friend's birthday." The man smiled, stepping a few steps closer. "You're Anne, right?" She raised her eyebrows, surprised. "Yes, how do you know?" "I am Jerry, Sophie's father," he explained. "She showed me a picture of you. She speaks very highly of you and considers you a great friend." Anne observed him with renewed attention. Was this the elderly father she had imagined? The man in front of her looked at most 45 years old, far from the mental image she had created. "Wow, you are very young to be Sophie's father," she commented before she could stop herself, immediately blushing at her indiscretion. Jerry laughed, a warm sound that immediately made her relax. "Yes, I was very young when her mother got pregnant. I was only 20 years old. We were practically kids raising a kid." The conversation flowed with surprising ease. Jerry talked about how he met Sophie's mother in college, about the shock and joy of the unexpected pregnancy, and about the happy years they had together before the illness that took her away. Anne shared her own story, the prolonged engagement that never came to fruition, her postponed dream of motherhood, and how working at the magazine had become her refuge and passion. They lost track of time until Sophie appeared in the courtyard, hands on her hips and a playful expression on her face. "I looked for you everywhere. I see you've already met," she noted, looking from one to the other with curiosity. Back at the party, Anne was surprised to find herself dancing with Jerry. He had a self-deprecating sense of humour about his old-fashioned dance moves, and they both laughed as they tried to keep up with the frenetic pace of the current music. During a moment of rest, Jerry leaned in to comment in her ear, "I bet we'd rather be dancing to some slow jazz right now." A shiver ran down Anne's spine. How did he know she was a jazz fan? It was as if he had read her thoughts. At the end of the night, while Sophie was saying goodbye to the last guests, Jerry approached Anne. "It was a great pleasure to meet you," he said, his voice softer than necessary. "I would like to have your number so we can talk about jazz and wines, perhaps." Anne felt her heart race as it hadn't in years. They exchanged numbers and, in the days that followed, messages. They started with casual texts about music, movies, and memories of times they both had lived through, cultural references that Anne couldn't share with her younger friends. The messages evolved into late-night calls that lasted for hours. Anne found herself eagerly waiting for the phone to ring, like a teenager awaiting news from a first love. A week later, Jerry invited her to dinner. He appeared at her apartment door with a bouquet of peonies. How did he know they were her favourites? Opened the car door for her, pulled out her chair at the restaurant. Little gestures that her ex-fiancé had abandoned after the first year together. The dinner was perfect. The conversation, the wine, the way Jerry looked at her, with genuine interest and something more, something that made her stomach turn. "Why did you never marry again?" Anne asked as they shared a chocolate dessert. Jerry contemplated the question for a moment, swirling the wineglass between his fingers. "After I lost Eliza, I dedicated myself entirely to Sophie. She needed me, and I needed her to keep moving forward. I tried dating a few times when she went to college, but nothing significant." He looked up, meeting Anne's eyes. "Until now." Anne felt her face heat up. It had been a long time since she experienced that combination of nervousness and excitement. In the following weeks, more dinners, walks in the park hand in hand, nights watching movies wrapped in a blanket. Jerry made Anne feel valued, seen, understood. And for the first time in years, she allowed herself to dream of a different future, one that included family, perhaps even the child she so desired. But there was an elephant in the room. Sophie. Anne hadn't told her friend about her relationship with Jerry. With each passing day, the secret weighed more heavily. She knew she was wrong to hide something so significant, but she feared Sophie's reaction. What if the friendship she so cherished was destroyed? "We need to tell her," Jerry insisted one night after another dinner where they had to choose a secluded restaurant to avoid the risk of running into Sophie. "We're not doing anything wrong, Anne. We are two adults who met and fell in love." Anne agreed, her heart heavy. "I'll talk to her tomorrow after work." But fate had other plans. That very night, while Anne slept, Jerry sent a loving message accompanied by a photo of the two of them together at their last meeting, Anne smiling broadly as Jerry kissed her cheek. The next morning, Sophie was unusually quiet at work. During lunch, Anne tried to start several conversations, but was met with monosyllabic responses. Finally, as they were returning to the office, Sophie suddenly stopped in the deserted hallway. "You're dating my dad," she said, not as a question, but as an accusation. Anne felt her blood run cold. "Sophie, I was going to tell you today. I saw the photo on his phone. You both looked very happy together, while you were acting behind my back." "We weren't acting behind your back," Anne tried to explain, her voice trembling slightly. "It happened naturally, and we wanted to be sure it was something serious before—" The slap came quickly and unexpectedly, leaving a stinging mark on Anne's cheek. More painful, however, was the look of betrayal in Sophie's eyes. "You took advantage of our friendship," accused Sophie, tears starting to stream down her face. "Do you think you're going to be my mother? You will never take her place. Never." Sophie ran away, leaving Anne alone in the hallway, one hand on her aching cheek and tears in her own eyes. The following weeks were a blur of sadness and attempts at reconciliation. Anne respected Sophie's space at work, but suffered from the loss of the friendship. Jerry, for his part, tried to talk to his daughter, explaining that his love for Anne in no way diminished the love he had felt for Eliza. "I'm not trying to replace your mother," Jerry explained during a tense dinner with Sophie. "But Anne makes me happy in a way I haven't felt in a long time. And I know your mother would want me to move on, to find someone to share my life with." Sophie remained silent, picking at her food without really eating. "I fell in love with Anne," Jerry continued, "and that doesn't erase anything I experienced with your mother. They are different chapters of my life, and both are important." It was only when Jerry showed Sophie Eliza's old diary, where she expressed her fear that if anything happened to her, Jerry would spend the rest of his life alone, that something changed in the young girl's eyes. She wrote this when she discovered the illness, Jerry explained, his voice choked with emotion. If something happens to me, I don't want you to be alone. Promise me you'll find someone to love again. It was the last promise I made to her. A month later, Anne was in her apartment, a glass of wine in hand and a forgotten book on her lap, when the doorbell rang. In the hallway stood Sophie, her eyes red and a small, hesitant smile on her lips. May I come in? Sitting on the sofa, the words came slowly, painful, unnecessary. It wasn't fair what I did, Sophie acknowledged. You weren't trying to take my mother's place. You were just falling in love with my father, and he with you. Anne reached out, holding Sophie's hand. I should have told you earlier. I was afraid of losing your friendship, which has become so important to me. Afraid of losing me, or afraid of losing my father? Both, Anne admitted honestly. You two became my family when I least expected it. Sophie nodded, silent tears running down her face. He hadn't smiled like that in years, you know. That silly smile in the photo. I never thought I would see him smile like that again. A year later, in a small ceremony in the garden of Jerry's house, now also Anne's home, they exchanged vows under a floral arch. Sophie, as the maid of honour, handed over the rings with a genuine smile. At the reception, while Jerry was talking to some guests, Sophie approached Anne, 2 glasses of champagne in her hands. Are you happy? She asked, offering one of the glasses. Anne accepted the drink, watching her now husband from a distance. More than I ever thought possible. He is too, Sophie confirmed, and that's all that matters. 10 months later, in the maternity ward, Anne held little Thomas, her newborn son, in her arms. Jerry stood by her side, his eyes teary, as Sophie walked into the room carrying a teddy bear almost bigger than herself. He's perfect, Sophie whispered, gazing at her brother with admiration. You gave me the greatest gift a best friend could give. Anne smiled, exhausted but radiant, while Jerry put one arm around his daughter and another around his wife. A reconfigured family, united not just by blood ties, but by choices, forgiveness, and the kind of love that grows in the most unexpected places. As the afternoon sun streamed through the hospital windows, Anne reflected on the winding paths that life takes. How a chance meeting at a noisy party could lead to this moment of perfect fulfillment. How the pain of the past, her broken engagement, Sophie's mother's passing, could pave the way for new beginnings. And how sometimes happy endings are not the end of a story, but just the beginning of another. If you enjoyed the story, please leave a comment with a rating from 1 to 5 to show how much you liked it. Also, watch the video that is now appearing on your screen. See you soon.